Patrick Walls is the founder of Starter Story, an outlet that's published thousands of case studies on how entrepreneurs built successful businesses. At one point, he was selling upwards of $50,000 a month in sponsorships. But earlier this year, he not only stopped selling advertising, he also switched from recurring subscriptions to a one-time payment that gave customers permanent access to his content archives. The move helped him grow to $1.5 million in annual revenue. In a recent interview, he talked about why he got tired of chasing sponsors and his motivations for switching from subscriptions to one-time payments. I also spoke to Bradley Hope, a former Wall Street Journal reporter and co-author of the New York Times bestselling book Billion Dollar Whale. In 2021, he co-founded Project Brazen, a production studio that creates narrative nonfiction across podcasts, books, newsletters, TV, and film. He answered questions about how he chooses narrative projects to fund and the process for adapting a single piece of IP into multiple formats. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. These interviews were actually part of an office hours series I host. Twice a month, I invite featured guests onto a live Zoom call and then allow my audience to ask them questions. There's only one way to join these live calls, by becoming a subscriber to my newsletter. Go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, let's jump into the episode. I have two amazing featured guests this week. The first is Patrick Walls. He is the founder of Starter Story, and that is an outlet that does a lot of things now, but it first started by publishing a lot of case studies that kind of like walk the reader through step by step how really successful entrepreneurs built their businesses, where he would actually, interview them about how they, got the idea, how they launched the business, how they monetized, all that kind of stuff. It's since become much more expansive and does more things, which we'll jump into. And we'll have him talk a little bit about that in the beginning, but that's kind of, what its origin, how it was originally set up. The other featured guest is Bradley Hope. He is a former Wall Street Journal reporter, and he is the co-author of a New York Times bestselling book that he wrote with another Wall Street Journal reporter, and it's called Billion Dollar Whale. And then that was so successful that in 2021, they left their job at the Wall Street Journal and co-founded a company called Project Brazen, which is kind of like almost like a holding company, although probably that's not the right word for it, but it's like a production studio that creates narrative nonfiction, and they greenlight projects that get turned into long narrative serial podcasts, books, newsletters, and then they've also taken several of their projects and sold them to TV and film studios. So we're going to be talking about, what goes into, greenlighting a piece of IP like that and adapting it across several different formats. So I want to start with you, Patrick. And could you maybe start by giving us a brief overview of what Starter Story is and what it publishes? Obviously, I talked a little bit about what it was originally, but what is it doing today?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Simon. We did start out with just basic case studies on a website, which is like little rundowns of how businesses, we interview entrepreneurs about how they got started, how they came up with their idea, how they grew their business. But then over time, we've kind of turned into a small media company that covers really just any kind of entrepreneurship, and kind of online businesses is what our core thing is, usually more smaller businesses rather than the typical VC funded type businesses. We cover, things you can start once you quit your 9 to 5, or side hustles, or, small to medium sized online businesses. We have still our website with, lots of articles and also interviews and case studies. And then we also have a newsletter, and we also in the last year, we've been doing a lot with video. So we started a YouTube channel, and also do TikTok, Instagram, shorts and content on social as well.
Yeah, and I was looking at your website for the first time since the last time I wrote about you, and I was amazed at how different it looks today than it did then, and we'll get to talk about that. But like one of the to kind of start off, or how big is your audience, just to give them some context?
Yeah, our newsletter is 150,000, and our social following across all channels is about 500,000. And then we do pretty well with SEO. with Google traffic, and we do about 1.5 million from a month from Google.
Yeah. So that's a lot of traffic, a lot of eyeballs, and it's also a high value audience in the sense that it's entrepreneurs and operators. So that's probably something that, brands really want to reach. And the last time I spoke to you, you had a very kind of robust advertising business. You had like a regular ongoing annual main sponsor, and then you were selling sponsorships. Before we talk about what you did after, like in terms of getting rid of sponsorships, like what were the kind of typical sponsors that you were attracting back when you were doing sponsorships?
Yeah, I can give you a little bit of the rundown because it might give you
Sure.
some context into how we went from where we were with advertisers to now not really working with advertisers anymore. In the beginning, when I started, I had just started it while I was working a full-time job, and we got our first big advertiser, and that was the first money that I ever made with the business. And it was amazing because it was like a year deal up front, and it was for like more money than I ever could have imagined at the time because it was, just a little side project for me. So that
It
was
was like
exciting.
$12,000 or something like that,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, which was more than I ever had at the time. And it gave me the, I guess, the courage or the ambition to quit my job and do this full time. So advertising was huge for us. And it is amazing what it can do for businesses and like for small newsletters or for really any media businesses. I don't want to say that it's not something that media businesses should do. But over the time, I always felt a little, I guess, nervous about these, because we had one big brand who was sponsoring us, and I was like, okay, they're happy, and they were with us for many years, but eventually I was like, hey, maybe we should have some sort of paid product or some sort of another revenue stream. So in about, I think shortly after, maybe a couple of years after starting, I created just the very, very beginnings of like our own product, which was basically just like a small subscription at the time. $12 a month or something like that is what we charged for it. And, you didn't really get much at all with it. I just wanted to start it. And then over the years, it's kind of morphed into something that had gotten a lot bigger. And I have some notes here just so I have the correct timeline. Yeah, it was basic at the time. And then by 2020, 2021, so about 2 years ago, it kind of got into a point where it was about half and half. So we are doing about half of our revenue from subscriptions or from our paid product, which is in many different shapes and forms as it grew. And
Yeah.
then half of it was from these advertisers. And this is great because, we're a bootstrap business, and I always want to just have that, I guess, that hedging my bet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I talk about a lot is revenue diversification. I think, and you're probably going to disagree with me because you went the other route. Is like, sometimes a lot of solo creators are too dependent on subscriptions, and maybe they do need to think about other, forms of monetization like advertising and stuff like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So
Then
that
we,
was, yeah.
yeah.
Keep on going.
Then we
Sorry.
got to about mid last year, and we started doing really well with advertisers again. And we had actually lost we had a sponsor for about 3 years, and they kind of paid our bills for the first 3 years. They were great, but then they decided to cut their ad budget out of nowhere, and we basically lost them. So then we said, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and let's get new advertisers. So we kind of went through that. And it was great at first. We got up to like $50,000 a month, which was a lot, which was more than we were getting from our original advertiser. And then it was great. So I was feeling really confident about it. And then we had a couple months, I think it was like November, December last year, where we did zero. We basically did zero, like on all the deals. The deal flow kind of just stopped. Maybe this was the holidays or whatever. But it made me, at the end in the new year, I'm always thinking about what's the next thing. And I decided, I really looked at the numbers. I was like, it's 50% our own products, 50% advertisers. And I think it's not really a problem of which one is better than the other. It was more like a focus thing for us.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, it was putting more, it was putting, you were taking the thing that you could put more in your control, whereas advertisers, you were, beholden to like a very small number of people, right?
yeah, yep, exactly. And that was kind of more the business that I wanted to build, just for my own personal preference and the team and what we like doing. Like we like building a product and getting feedback from customers and iterating rather than, sales cycles, closing deals, getting on calls. and kind of going through that kind of up and down roller coaster that is sometimes the advertising business. So for us, it was more of a focus thing, and it's worked out well for us. It was definitely like a lot of work to switch the focus of the business. Like it's not that we don't accept advertisers anymore. We just don't really go crazy for it. And we won't work with like shitty advertisers that want bad terms or want to do like short test runs and that sort of stuff. We're looking for now more like inbound, which we do get some of, and then people that want to work long-term and are more brand and not necessarily too performance or conversion focused. So we're still open to working with advertisers, and we still do work with advertisers. And we also do have programmatic stuff because that's easy. It doesn't take any real work from us. But all of our focus and what we can control, is in our paid product. And it's worked out really well for us, although it was a little bit hard in the beginning to make that switch and all that. But now we're doing more in revenue than we were doing with both last year by a lot.
You're doing over $1 million in revenue, right? Over $1 million in revenue, you were saying?
Yeah. In terms of, we're on track for probably 1.5 million this year. Mm-hmm. And if you were to look at like on a monthly basis, like last month, we did twice as much revenue than we did total of the previous year when when we were working on both the paid product and the advertisers.
Yeah. So let's get into talking about like what you're actually offering and your conversion. And David, I see your question. I'll get to calling you on that once we get to that part. But like I noticed, I visited your website for the first time in a few years. And back then you had kind of a traditional homepage where people could click on and read the latest case studies and you publish. Now your homepage is extremely simple, and the only thing it allows you to do is enter an email address. Can you talk about your reasoning behind that?
Yep. That was one of the big changes that we made in the beginning of the year when we said we want to focus on our paid product, because now that we're not trying to please advertisers, we now can focus on getting people into our just one product. So now it's nice because it's, I guess, centered our focus into one thing, which is getting people to join our paid product. And the best way that we have found to do that, we tried so many things. And that's why you can go to starterstory.com and see what it looks like. It's really just a landing page, which is almost like a sales letter, or something that's designed to sell you on joining our paid product or our community. And that's, now that we have this one goal, it kind of like unifies, like it's just kind of pushed us in the direction of like, okay, for our newsletters, we now have one simple messaging. On the website, we have this one simple messaging, and we're not so focused on so much, because I think when you work with advertisers, you get more focused on impressions and clicks and putting more out into the world, and then having the advertiser model. When you have your own product, you can still put your stuff out into the world, but then now we're treating the website more like bottom of funnel. So when they see our YouTube videos, when they see our TikTok and Instagram stuff, they join our newsletter. And then when they get to our website, that's more of the conversion side of things.
Yeah. And David, you had asked a question about the newsletter and the conversions on that. You want to ask your question about that part?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Pat. I love your content. You've been killing it with video this past year too. So I'm curious about whatever you're comfortable sharing, conversion, specifically from free, getting them on that newsletter, and then into buying what I thought was a subscription, but I think you only offer one-time access now. So anything you can share around that.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the one-time access in a minute, but just in terms of the conversions of like, did you find that, I think there's a reason why you're trying to get people to sign up for an email, a newsletter, or enter their email address right away. Was that like what you were seeing as your number one conversion driver?
Yeah. We make almost all of our conversions from our newsletter. So, someone goes to the website, they're not going to buy an expensive paid product right from the website. They're going to join the email list, learn more about it, and then subscribe. So that's our biggest focus. Our biggest moneymaker in terms of like direct conversions is going to be from our email newsletter, not from our YouTube videos or anything like that. As far as conversion, we do get a lot of people on our email list that are just through, because we do things like certain registration walls and things like that. So some of this stuff on our newsletter is not the people that join our newsletter is not necessarily the highest intent. But to give you a relative number, I would say probably like 0.5% convert to the paid product from the newsletter. But our newsletter gets like 2,000 people signing up a day.
And what is your newsletter? Like what are you offering on the newsletter front?
On the newsletter, so we will really just share stories that we've been publishing. So when you go to the front page of the website, you'll notice that it is a landing page that looks something to give your email, but still all of the content on the website is still accessible from Google search, or if you were to get sent the link directly, or if we share it on our newsletter, you can still read the content. It's just the landing page. The main page of the site is this landing page style. So we'll share a lot of our interviews with entrepreneurs. We'll also share, like, we've been doing more like deep dive investigative stuff where we like dive into, the latest trend or, certain business ideas. And then we'll use that as a way to pitch our paid product as well, or send a lot of free stuff as well.
Yeah. And you're like incredibly aggressive about people to hand over their email address. Like I Googled one of your case studies, I landed on it, I started scrolling down, and you cannot get to any of your content without registering first, right?
Yep. It's all dependent. We test like everything when it comes to that, but that's the registration paywall I think you ran into, where if you come to certain articles that we believe are more intent driven, we'll ask for an email address before you can read the full content. That's not for every article on the site, but is like some little like kind of custom thing we've put together.
Yeah. So as David mentioned, I think a lot of people would assume that when you get to the landing page or the page that you direct you to become a member, that it's something for a recurring subscription, which is what most creators are doing these days. You basically offer a one-time payment, lifetime subscription. What is the what is the thinking there? What is the motivation? Because obviously you're giving up, you're charging more up front, but you're giving up the opportunity for more recurring revenue. So what's the thinking there?
Yep. It's a lot there. We tested it a lot. So we've tested $1 free trial for 7 days, then pay yearly. We've tested yearly. We've tested this lifetime offer or one-time fee, and we found the one-time fee converts the best and creates the happiest customers in the long term. I do realize that it does take, I think the long-term vision for our paid product would be that it is a recurring product, but the reality of the type of product that we have, which is helping entrepreneurs who want to start their business, this is a point in time type of purchase. That it is also an aspirational thing to want to start your own business, is that a one-time purchase fits that the best.
Interesting. So because your theory is maybe they will only really need your site for like 2 or 3 years max. And so it might as well just get the payment for that 2 or 3 years rather than trying to convert them and then have them unsubscribe later.
Yeah. You can think about it as like a course. I sometimes think about it as a course. Like if you wouldn't pay a recurring revenue for a course, you would pay a one-time fee for a course. And our product is more comprehensive than a course, but it is the same kind of value for the customer as a course would be, or a similar type of value as a course. Yeah.
But it's a lot different than a course, because a course you start it and you finish it in a set period of time, whereas they get access to all future case studies you publish, all future courses, all your business ideas. So talk about, and then there's the community. So talk about the different components of what they're getting, and what's the price point. Talk about the price points and then what they're getting for those.
We play around a lot with pricing, but our latest pricing right now is 2 tiers. You can if you go to starterstory.com/select-plan, or just put your email in, you can get it. You can see it. And it's 520, I think. Let me look at, I don't remember exactly.
I think it was like $800 or $1,000 were the 2 price points I saw.
Right now it's $695, $1,095. Yeah. So the lower plan, and that's one-time payment. The lower plan gives you access to every case study we've done, which is like over almost 5,000. And we also do these investigative reports. So you're getting full access to our, this is almost like the New York Times side of things, where you get full access to everything. And then we also have a Slack community for founders, which is quite new for us, but it is a nice benefit. And then if you buy the more expensive plan, you get full access to our courses. And courses is something that we're going to go leaning more towards, is people love the courses. And just that's what I've seen in the industry too, is that info products and courses can be, some of the higher ticket items.
Yeah. And there's got to be something psychological with how you're doing this, in the sense of like, people are getting very wary of signing up for these recurring payments, and just this idea of like, wow, I get, I pay this one-time amount, and yeah, it's a decent amount more than a lot of these other creators are charging, but I'm going to get lifetime access to all their case studies. I'm going to get involved in this community that I have permanent access to. Do you think that's like helping you with conversions? It's like they just need to make the decision once, and they're not going to have to worry about it every month or every year, whether it's like providing value to them?
Yep. And I think it comes down to also like buyer psychology too, is like when you make a big purchase like this, you assign more value to it, and it's like making an investment in yourself. I don't think this applies to all types of domains. For example, if it's, if you run a website about, cooking or something like that, but this is starting a business, changing your life, getting out of your 9 to 5. And that's like a really exciting aspirational activity where the higher purchase can also, so we noticed that when people would buy our $1 trial, they would be, the sentiment of the customer would be a lot lower, after some time or after their purchase than if they made the big purchase. I don't know too much about buyer psychology, but from some things that I've read and talking to other people that run similar businesses, that was kind of a big learning for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So CJ, you're a CFO and have a paid newsletter geared towards CFOs. What is this speaking to you at all? This idea of just charging one large upfront price versus, nickel and diming them over, a period of months or whatever?
So I'm a total dork, and I was actually trying to work backwards with the LTV to CAC of what you could get out of a customer. And I was actually really skeptical at first, Pat, but I think you kind of nailed it. I think charging a higher price point here once, it's probably multiple years of what you would get out of somebody if you charge them month to month. So like, it totally checks out.
Yeah. And plus, when you think about churn with like just billing failures and stuff like that, like people who didn't even want to unsubscribe, but their credit card didn't work, you just convert them once, and then you don't have to worry about those headaches. Like CJ, you do these like big research reports that I just saw today and stuff like that. So your model would almost kind of cater to this a little bit.
Yeah, you've actually got me thinking if I'm doing parts of my model right. And one underrated part of this, Pat, is you get the money up front, which means that you can reinvest it in your business or pay yourself. You don't have to wait every month to get paid. So I mean, there are puts and takes.
Yep. I think that's great if you're a bootstrap. I was just talking to someone who, did that for a long time, and now they're doing more recurring. I think when you're a big business, the recurring thing really makes sense, or you're a business that wants to sell. But if you want upfront, it can be a really big boost to your business. And we, had big cash inflows when we do like big, Memorial Day deals or something like that. To answer your question about LTV too, I definitely don't have the answers for that. But because we used to do yearly, we were able to look at when people typically cancel for our product. And then we kind of got to this number that we are right now by looking at what people were paying yearly, what that meant for LTV in terms of like this many people cancel after year 2 and year 3. And then we multiplied that LTV number by 1.5. And that's that number that you see. It's general ballpark, but that's kind of how we got to that. And people have told me that if you are going to do a lifetime deal, charge 1.5 LTD. Like LTV. That's something that I heard from someone. I don't know how accurate it is, but 1.5 LTV is a good way to get most of your money when you're doing a lifetime deal.
Nice.
And when you're talking to your customers, like, what's your sense of what drives the conversion? Is it the case studies? Is it the database of business ideas? Is it the community? Is it the online courses? Like, what's your sense of that biggest conversion point?
Yeah, I'd say it's the case studies, the inspiration, a lot of our customers find our content and our case studies very inspiring. And that's usually like what is the most common word that we'll see. So case studies, and then also our courses as well.
Awesome. So I'm going to be switching over to Bradley very soon. So if you want to ask a question to Pat, this is the best time to do it. David had mentioned that he had been admiring your YouTube channel, and I've been admiring it as well. I don't know how I stumbled across it, but these are like highly produced videos where you go and visit entrepreneurs and they at their homes or their places of business and have them walk you through how they built their business. How does that fit into your larger strategy?
Yeah. So YouTube is insane. I don't know if anyone else is doing YouTube now, but it is by far the most valuable audience I've ever seen. And I've looked at a lot of numbers from SEO and Google and TikTok and short form and everything. And the numbers in YouTube are insane. So if you can figure out YouTube, which we've done pretty well, but obviously it can be way, way bigger. That is really where a huge business can be built.
In what sense, though? Like programmatic advertising through their AdSense, or?
Oh, no, sorry. With the paid product. Yeah, with the paid product. Our programmatic, we're doing maybe 3,000 a month right now, and we're doing about 5,000 views a day, maybe 10,000 views a day. But the conversions that I see, okay, so we have a mid-roll in our YouTube videos that says, hey, join our paid product starter story. You get case studies, you get all this stuff. It's about a 1-minute ad in the middle of the video. And for one video, we saw $40,000 to $50,000 in paid product sales.
Holy crap, that's amazing. And is that people clicking on a link, or are they Googling? Like, how do you track those conversions?
We, after every sign up, so we have a link, we can track the sign up, but a lot of people go and just search starter story in Google. So after people sign up for our paid product, we ask where you found us. So that's like kind of back of the napkin attributable math. I think it could be even more, but that was one video that went viral. I will have to say that it did go viral, but if you can replicate that, that's a big business. And I know a lot of YouTubers that have huge businesses in the entrepreneur space that are selling paid products.
Jennifer has a question. Jennifer, okay.
Hi, folks. Hi, sorry, I'm on my phone and I was struggling to find how to unmute. Thanks for all this information. My name is Jennifer, and I'm working on something that's somewhat similar in that it's for that aspirational entrepreneurial audience, except for just a sliver of that audience, which is people who would be focused on like the music industry. So the artists, the performers, the promoters, and then your engineers and all those kinds of people. And I did just help launch a product that was a lot more similar in just the small and medium scale founders. And I just recently I'm so glad to see this call, because I decided that I do want to exit at a certain point, that's how I want to build. And so that shifted how I was thinking about, I was thinking it would pretty much be advertising. And I've been thinking, once I made that shift, it was like, okay, advertising isn't going to get me to the numbers I want and the time scale I want. And there's a lot of, so what we're doing is just leaning more heavily on some of the things that I was planning to do anyway, one of which is events. So, the skills, just your basic business networking event, small business networking, again, just catered to a specific sliver of the industry. And also getting folks to do tutorial type things, like a master class type of thing. And I was just curious about, when you're offering these different things, like, is there the difference between your stories versus your course-like things versus your, your deep dives? I'm sorry, I can't remember what you were calling it, but just sort of like, does each thing offer a really unique type of content, each product type, or is it, how much is it repackaging? I'm sure some of it is, but could you talk a little bit about what the mix is, I guess, and what you do with what?
Yeah. And some of your repackaging is brilliant, because you take your case studies and then create like SEO optimized articles about that. So you want to talk a little about that.
Yeah. Well, to talk about what you said about how it's not scalable, that's also something that contribute to the decision. I talked to a pretty successful founder about, what's a more sellable business, an advertising business or your own product. And he told me that if you can have your own product with recurring revenue, that could be definitely a more sellable business than advertising business. To answer your question about how we differentiate our products, I don't think that we do like a super great job of it. We kind of package it all into one thing, and we're trying to figure out what people like the most. What we found is what people like the most is the case studies. and the courses. I would say those are the two main things. If I were to give advice to anyone that wants to start a paid product, is to just find one product that your audience wants and just sell the crap out of that instead of having lots of different disparate products. I would say that we don't do a very good job of that, but we're trying to like hone more in on having just one thing, which is why we package it all into this subscription, join Starter Story Premium. And we try not to differentiate too much on the features, but really just make it all about one thing. So in all of your advertising, on your website, on your newsletter, on everything, you're pushing people towards the same thing, the same value prop, rather than differentiating on features or having too many different things. I don't know if that helps. I don't think we've done a super great job of that, but that would be where I'd want to go with it.
Yeah. And I've seen something with creators where they, especially when it's like a solo creator and they're offering like 5 different subscription tiers. And it's just like, no, you're just confusing the end consumer, and you're giving yourself, more work than you can bite off on your own. Just pick like one master subscription and offer a bunch of things under there. But anyway, I want to start transitioning over to Bradley. Pat, I don't, if you feel comfortable, could you, if only if you feel comfortable, but if people want to ask you any follow-up questions, feel free to leave your email address in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome, of course, to stay. Bradley, I wanted to switch over to you now. So I gave the kind of brief overview of what Project Brazen is, but could you maybe just a little bit expand on that? Like, what are the different, like, I called you almost a holding company, although technically I'm guessing that's not what you are, but you operate, it's not like you're one unified media company. You're like kind of supporting lots of different projects at a time, right? Is how it works.
Yeah, I think, well, so Tom, Wright, and I, we used to work together at the Wall Street Journal, and it does happen in journalism that after a while you feel this urge to go out on your own. We wrote a book together, and that was our first experience being entrepreneurial journalists. And when you write a book, it's totally up to you. It's not, there's really nobody else even editing it in the same way that they do in a newspaper. And we really loved that experience and the freedom and creativity that we had. So initially, we wanted to create something that was just a place to keep doing that feeling, and maybe in different mediums, because we figured if we wanted to keep writing books, I did 3 books in 6 years, which is a very high rate of book writing. So we might be able to achieve something like that if we take turns or something, but it wasn't the scale that we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to explore other mediums. So we started off with podcasts. But what I'm telling you is kind of the evolution of the company. So in the beginning, I wrote a book that was kind of our startup capital, the advance from that. And then we started making podcasts in particular. And the reason that we liked podcasts is, of course, they're one of the great long form mediums of our time. They're obviously very popular, but you can make them faster because there's a team involved. Whereas a book, it's kind of inconceivable to have a team of people writing a book or working on a book. And so we were able to produce a lot more projects than we would have if we had done it kind of in a more individualistic fashion. So our first phase was just kind of getting that scale, getting that team in place to make things. And then what happened is, as a result of the way that we made it, we ended up raising some money in a fund that we used to finance all of these different projects. And it's kind of what I think of it as, it's venture content. So obviously all IP has the potential to have a very large return if it's kind of cultivated and treated correctly. It's an odd thing, but newspapers produce IP every day, but it's worth almost nothing because of the shallowness of it, or the duration of it, or just the lack of care when it comes to this concept that this is a story that could travel into other mediums, documentaries, films, TV, even audiobooks, things like that, other kind of mediums. So what was I trying to say about that, actually? Sorry,
well, I think you were getting into like how it's funded.
Oh yeah. So since we were able to independently finance it with this venture content fund, we ended up realizing that we had a network. And so we started to kind of scramble to figure out how do we better take advantage of the fact that we own all of this content and, many, many hours of very premium audio storytelling. So earlier this year, we kind of, in my mind, diverged into 2 directions. We have Project Brazen, the studio, where it could be individual stories, or it could be brands, micro brands in the world of content, where that stuff is kind of innovated and created. And then we have Brazen.fm, which is our network. And right now it's an audio network. So obviously it has an Apple channel, and then we also have a website where you can also consume it as a network through Supporting Cast, this other tech tool. And we have a paid product, so that, obviously you can binge the shows before other people, you can have ad free, and so that was kind of a conceptual innovation. But now we're moving into a new phase where we're thinking about this kind of premium long form storytelling, and we want to use the same network infrastructure to distribute other kinds of stories. So maybe serialized written format, or maybe sometimes both a written version and a podcast version, or audiobook version. And so I think of our projects is really in two phases. The first phase is the kind of direct to consumer phase. You're just appealing to readers and listeners, and this is something that they want to add to their diet. And then the second phase requires additional resources from partners, but it's that bigger, deeper project. So a good example is we made a podcast called The Sound about Havana syndrome, this kind of weird phenomenon that's been affecting spies and diplomats. And so we use the podcast to do a true, journalism exploration of this story. Our reporters travel to different countries, and it's a very, a complete project, but there's a lot that's left kind of underexplored, even the kind of individual sufferers, their stories. So what we did is, alongside the podcast, we deployed a documentary team, really small and flexible, who recorded a lot of material that was really in anticipation of this second life that the story was going to have. And we created what's called a sizzle. So it's about 5-minute long, collection of interviews and things. We were able to find a partner, this bigger documentary company called XTR. And another thing about the way that journalism works is when you have intellectual property, there's different kinds of rights that you can sell individually, including, scripted rights for like a film or television show, or unscripted rights. And if you sell your unscripted rights, it's usually a pretty unimpressive number. It's like a very small percentage of the overall budget. But in our case, because we were the actual people on the ground filming this, and we know the story, we have a plan, we're able to be the true co-producer of the actual second project, rather than a kind of passive rights holder.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, another.
And that's just to summarize, so your model is the idea of you're going to go into a narrative project, and you're not just funding that project. The idea is that you're going to have this valuable IP that you can adapt into several works if you can. So it might start out as a narrative podcast. You might then sell it as a docuseries or a documentary, or sell it to a New York publisher as like a book project, or you might sell it as a scripted docudrama to a Netflix or a Warner Brothers or something like that. So your model is to find really good stories and then sell it, resell the IP and continue to monetize and mine the IP in multiple different ways, right?
Yes, and I think the one additional distinction I would make is there's a lot of companies out there that are called production companies, and they are zero risk-taking companies. So they find an idea, and then they find a buyer, and as a result of that transaction, they had something that was really valuable, and then they lost control of it very quickly, because that buyer now controls the whole intellectual property. So, and then the other thing is, a lot of people who are journalistic companies or production companies, they don't have any vertical integration of this future life of the project. So they throw their hands up in the air and say, well, we don't know anything about documentaries, so we'll leave that to somebody else. But as a result, again, they become a minority player in that future life. So we're trying to really vertically integrate. We have on our team people who make podcasts who are really good, people who are like me, more of the pure journalism part, people from the documentary side. So when we get to those extra phases, and we have consultants from the film and television world that work with us kind of on projects, when we get to that further development, we are really involved. Like we really did a lot of the development of like what this could be in these other formats. And that, I think that's a critical component that's only really possible if you are a risk taker and you still control the IP. Because like, just for example, if you make a podcast and you sell it to a company like Sony or iHeart or whatever it might be, those guys now control it, and you get kind of updates, but you don't really, play a big role in anything that comes from it.
Yeah. And so, well, I have a question about first. I'm going to start with like, how do you choose a project? Like, is it like you're true, like when you're vetting potential, because I'm guessing you're spending a lot of money for like, if you're doing a narrative podcast or something like that. Is it that you have to be able, you and your business partners have to be able to visualize this project, like having multiple legs? Like what's kind of your kind of decision-making process of, is it that this has to be like, has to at least have the potential to have multiple formats and mediums and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think probably in the earliest days it was like very gut instinct, and but I quickly realized that that's a dangerous thing to rely upon all the time. So we try to do. There's a couple of different filters. One of the filters is, if somebody wants to do a podcast, is there some kind of access, or who is the key audio of this podcast going to be? If you just have a great idea, it's not enough. It has to be, you have a great idea that you can execute in a way that no one else can, and then even the subject itself. We have to say, okay, are there competitor projects that are very similar? All that kind of analysis. And there's a kind of very delicate balance that you have to do, which is you don't also want to be a cynical IP company. Like if we were just making IP and we were just trying to mine IP and sell it, we would end up creating a pretty lowbrow product. So there has to be a lot of care. That first project has to really be important or impactful, connect to a zeitgeist. But the other thing that we've done over time is we started collecting a lot more data just from the industry at large and understanding kind of trends and what's connecting, what's not connecting. And even these projects, before we greenlight them, we try to socialize them as much as possible with our network from the film and television world, the documentary world. We see who's excited about these projects. And if people are really kind of getting excited, I think that's another, just a good reason why we would be more likely to greenlight something.
Yeah. David, you have a question about why he's prioritizing audio and podcast over a lot of other mediums.
Yeah,
Well,
that was my question. So
yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I would like to do more print, to be honest. But I'm like missing doing print things, and but the good thing about audio is it really has the feeling of being an asset in terms of a journalistic product. So when you distribute podcasts, you obviously have all this advertising inventory, and it's kind of like, I don't know why I do this sometimes, but I sometimes like to think of what's my book value if everything goes down the drain tomorrow, like and I have to like sell everything, what's there? And something about a podcast is it's both the intellectual property, but it's also just like this asset. So it could go behind a paywall at some other company in some case, or so something I like about that. And also obviously it has been a trending format in terms of growth in advertising, over a long term, even if we're in a kind of a correction right now, and also audience growth. I find myself listening to a lot of audio just because I guess we're all just trying to fill all of our time with content of one kind or another. So if I'm going for a run or whatever it might be, so it's something that I didn't do before that I do a lot more now. So I think those are kind of some of the reasons. We'd like to do more video. We did an animation that was actually inspired by one of our podcasts. So it's like a documentary animation, but that's expensive to make at scale. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money. Audio is kind of in this sort of sweet spot where if you start to get a kind of a system for doing it and like a team who knows each other, you can really start to bring the costs down over time, especially if you do it more and more in-house. So yeah, those are some of the reasons.
I've heard it claimed that a narrative podcast, like one season, costs into the six figures. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say like a premium, 8-part podcast that involves some travel and whatever, it easily can start to rise up because into the 100, I think 150 would be considered a low number in the industry. In the industry, it's probably higher than 200 on average. We were able to make things a little bit cheaper for a variety of reasons, including this because we don't have to pad the budget because we're not selling to somebody else. But it's really the manpower that really adds up, and then other things too, like especially if you're selling podcasts, there's a lot of insurance that's needed, lawyer review of every episode, licensing. Whenever you listen to a podcast and you hear all this archival stuff, a lot of that has to be licensed individually. Just everything takes a lot of time, and music rights. It goes on and on. The number of things you have to do to make it work. I think probably most listeners have no idea that they're like listening to like a $500,000 podcast or something.
So yeah, because they think like, oh, anybody can have a mic and just record
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Like, what are the costs other than just your own time? So I was looking at your website. It's like you've had several hit podcasts, and you've sold the rights to some Hollywood studios for a few of them. I think like a lot of people, even who work in content full time, they think Hollywood is kind of like a black box. There are all these things like selling option rights and then getting it greenlit, and then there's so many things that could like basically delay or completely spike a project turning into an actual TV show. What's that process like of having a narrative podcast? Maybe it's a big hit. How do you sell that to a studio?
Well, so most companies like ours, we have a Hollywood agency that represents us, that makes the introductions and connections. And so they will send out your projects to a big list of people early on to gauge interest, and then that will lead to a lot of calls and introductions. Well, I'll just explain the system first, and then I'll explain how you avoid doing it the wrong way. But so first, typically a production company or some entity would do an option. So they would pay you essentially 10% of what they agree to be the value of the IP. So the value of the IP is usually called the purchase price. So, and that payment only kicks in. So usually an option is a 18-month contract that's renewable after 18 months. So it's really a 3-year contract. The first 18 months is deducted from the purchase price. The second 18 months is often an additional fee that you get on top of the purchase price. So you get 10%, and that purchase price could be something, I would say you're not doing very well if you're at like 300,000, but 500,000 to and up is kind of where you're thinking of this purchase price. And purchase price only kicks in. This is kind of the weakness of the model when that project is in production. So like when they start
and
to
so
film
just to back up, the option is it's basically just an exclusivity agreement, right? Like that you can't sell the project to anyone else. That's all they're buying, right?
Yeah, you're giving somebody the chance to. So this is the ironic thing, is they're giving you this fee, which is, it can be substantial. I mean, it can be $75,000, $50,000, which is not small. But then they pay a lot of money, like an extraordinary amount of money, to a screenwriter to write a screenplay. And then so that guy gets paid up front, the whole thing. And then if that package of the screenplay plus the IP plus maybe an actor or director gets picked up by a studio, and then it gets into production, then you finally get paid, at the end. That's kind of the weakness for the IP holder in those kind of situations. So like what I was going to say before is, so that's how it works in theory, but it's easy to make mistakes in this whole process, because sometimes people want to option things because they want to put it on a shelf because they have another project that's very similar, and they would rather not have your project out in the marketplace. There's no law that prevents them from doing that. And then some people want to option it, and they really don't have a hope or a prayer of ever making something out of it. And they've negotiated with you to take a very small fee that gives them this thing that now it gives a company, a non-risk taking company, a chance to build something on your hard work.
They're basically they're just hoarding IP basically for a relatively cheap price.
Even a small company could persuade you, oh, we're going to make the most amazing film you never heard of, and then but they don't really have much. So, but now they have your project. So then they go to somebody, oh, I got the rights to this project. And so now they have something, but it may be that they have no chance of actually succeeding. It's like they're really hustling. They're hoping for the best, So I think you have to do a lot of research. And one other thing I've noticed is the best thing of all is to go directly to a writer. So you have this project and you find a writer. That's what the whole thing's about anyway, is finding a writer. If you can find the writer, great. There's a lot less people involved. It's a lot faster as well. And so there's a lot of things like that we're learning. We're not experts, but we're learning through experience and through mistakes about the right way to optimize, this whole process, speed things up to some extent, because like you say, Billion Dollar Whale, for example, was published in 2018. It's now in a written format, but it's still a little ways away from actually entering production. And that's maybe a complicated story, because there was a lot of people trying to catch and kill that project and destroy it in different ways. But it can take a long time. It can take 5 years. It can take 10 years for things to really take off.
Yeah. So I've been in LA myself. I've seen that in every cafe, there's a bunch of people with laptops open with screenplay software on it. Patrick has a question in the chat. How do you find a good writer, especially since you don't have a lot of experience on the production side?
Well, luckily there's a kind of gravitational pull or magnetic pull between people like me and screenwriters, because it's their dream to actually be in the world and like learn about things directly. And so they're attracted to people who have good stories and good access and things like that. They're not like annoyed to be contacted. I think the sad truth is that you really need a writer who has a track record in order to make it more likely to succeed. So you're really looking for people who have big films and television shows under their belt, and those guys are pretty sought after, and they get paid well because they get hired all the time to write things that don't actually come out. So you can be an extremely successful millionaire screenwriter and nothing ever got made, because people they loved your work and they keep hiring you, and it goes into a shelf somewhere. And so I think it's a lot of times we're looking at, you think, oh, I love that film this person made, this kind of feels like something they could approach, that kind of thing. It's a kind of a dating process too. You have meetings with them, you see, can you work together, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Can you afford them? Can you afford them? Of course.
Yeah. Pat, do you have any other follow-up questions about the process of hiring a writer?
I'm not in the screenwriter world, but I just found it very hard to find good writers in, I guess, the content internet world, to find someone who's like a great writer.
Well, there are so many like business focused movies now, like, around it. Do you ever get a case study that you're like, wow, that would make a great movie or something?
Well, yeah, that's what we're trying to do more of, like narrative based stuff, story based stuff for our YouTube channel. That's where we're trying to go and build out like little stories and documentary style films for our YouTube channel. So anybody that can help with script writing and that sort of stuff is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
It is hard. It is hard to find, though. Unfortunately, in this day and age, there's so many journalists, lose their jobs. And if you find a journalist with the kind of right background, I think that would be the one that would help you the most.
So I've talked to, or based on my reading of the industry, is like one of the reasons that these narrative podcasts have a lot of risk is they each have to basically build an audience from scratch. And so, which can be hard to do. And obviously it's also sometimes hard to monetize. I know you've been thinking lately about how do you cross promote and use all the, now that you've built up a lot of successful projects, how do you utilize that reach so that you can ensure that a new narrative show has a little bit more, basically momentum behind it once it launches, rather than having to try to build that audience, while that one season is going?
Yeah, I mean, well, the good thing of having a network is you can give yourself a bit more of a boost, so you can cross promote with your network. But even better, you can trade cross promotions with other shows that have huge followings. So we have we're friends with Jordan Harbinger, who's got a big podcast, obviously, and so we've done some trades with him where maybe our podcast ad runs for like a week, but it runs on our network for like couple of months, just to kind of to make that trade one for one, but it's a nice thing to trade because it's a free trade, really. You're not having to pay any money. The crazy thing about podcasts is you cannot throw money at that problem. It's not a money solving problem. So if you have a podcast and you spent like $1 million on ads, you would be really depressed by the results, because it just does not convert. And you would also be depressed if you paid $1 million and got a front page article in the New York Times. The conversion rate would be like 0.01%. very little converts into podcasts for whatever reason, the weirdness of podcast listeners. So it's really all about these kind of more arcane things like cross promotions, like feed drops, feed swaps, in developing relationships with other podcasters. We had a show that we incubated that was kind of a women's spirituality project, and the podcast Snap Judgment had like a summer lull, and so they accepted a few podcasts to run one episode in their feed. So it's things like that that make a big difference. And then also, a lot of we are, if you look at every media company's founders, you can understand a lot about them. So like if you're a company run by an editor or a company run by a documentary person, it all has different ramifications. In the case of us, we used to write for the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and that's a very specific kind of story. It has to have an edge to it. It has to have a reason why you're reading it right now. It can't just be some great story from history. But that actually serves us well in the marketing, because when we have a project, it's kind of newsy in some way. It's like it's going to break news in some way or become, so we had this project about the King of Spain that we did, and we did it in English and in Spanish. And in Spain, our organic media coverage was so insane. It was like something like 3,000 separate media mentions of the podcast because it was so scandalous and whatever. So those kind of things help us a lot too. And our network is still pretty small, but it does give us a little boost, And we've tried some things like using the same feed for new shows, but it started to get pretty murky trying to find an old show in the same feed. So we're constantly rethinking that and trying to do some testing around it. But because in some ways, again, it's the balance. Like if you want to maximize the IP value, it should stand alone. It should be like a movie launch. But if you want to maximize the audience, then you should do other things that actually impinge on that, singular project. And so the other thing we do is a lot of design work. So we put a lot of it in, make a lot of trailers and things that we use in all kinds of different social things. And, it helps. All of those things help a little bit,
Yeah, so we're going to be winding down soon. So if you have any questions for Bradley, definitely add into the chat. Earlier, Pat talked about the importance of consolidating a paid product into one single massive product. I know you were debating, 6 or 7 months ago, whether you were going to launch because you wanted to get more audience revenue, whether you were going to launch several different subscription products or just have one massive Project Brazen thing where you would offer. Where did you kind of fall on that line?
I mean, for now, I think where I'm at right now is I feel like I'm very inspired by Pat, so I'm going to try to steal all his ideas. But in the meantime, I had this thought that there's just too many subscriptions. People are getting tired of them. They're annoying. So I'm going to try to do when I put more things behind the paywall, I'm going to make it more purchasable, like as an individual thing, just to let people not be a subscriber. Because it's kind of you're asking them a favor, but we should be kind of doing things for them the other way around. But I do like the idea of a kind of like lifelong Brazen membership where you get to know everything before everyone else and all that kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting idea to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Bradley, thanks so much for doing this. If you do feel comfortable, no pressure, but feel free to leave your email address in the comments so people can send follow-up questions for you. Thank you so much, Pat and Bradley. The wealth of information you shared. Definitely, there were things in there that I'm planning on stealing for my own media business. So thank you so much. You're welcome to stick around. I'm probably going to stick around for a few more minutes in case anybody wants to chat about their own media businesses. You're welcome to stay around, but if not, thanks again. And I'll make sure to send this video around once it's uploaded.